Welcome! My name is Kelly Anderson, and this is Fanimated, the animation fan podcast where we get a chance to geek out about our favorite animated media. Since the beginnings of Fanimated, I strive to focus on the art of animation and how this diverse medium deeply connects with a wide range of audiences. And I'm hoping to focus even more on the fandoms and individual fans that make these shows more than just stories, but impactful experiences that affect the lives of both the creators and audience members. In other words, I want to make sure Fanimated is a place where we celebrate phenomenal fans doing cool stuff, and a show where we support each other and find community in our common love for animation. So today I have a very special guest on the show. Her name is Bex, though many of you might know her on Tumblr as Tangled BEA. Her very popular Tangled the Series blog has been one of the many places where Tangled fans, myself included, have gone to connect with others and geek out about the show. You can hear her and other Tumblr blog runners on their podcast, Tangled Talk with Team Awesome. Not to mention, one of her blog posts actually helped me to embrace my love for animation in the face of adversity and create this podcast in the first place. You might remember me reading that post at the end of my very first episode of Fanimated. In it, Bex explains that despite being in her late 30s, she embraced her love for this artistic medium despite what anyone said. And through her blog and podcast, she continues to encourage others to do the same. I am so honored to have Bex on the show, and we have a lot to say about internet fandoms, connecting with animators, and how Tangled the series affected our lives personally. So let's get started and let's get animated. Well, thanks again. This is so exciting. I followed your blog for a long time, so I was just like, yes, if I'm gonna have anyone talk a little bit about Tangled with me and the Tangled fandom, it was gonna be you. Let's just get right into it. You clearly have such an enthusiasm for Tangled the series, and I absolutely love that. And I want to know, like, for you, like going way back to like 2010, like did you see Tangled in theaters? And like, what was it about Tangled specifically that like resonated with you and like kind of started you on this path to eventually making a blog about it because you love it so much, and you know, being able to talk with the animators and creators?
Okay, so I did see it in theaters. I think I saw it opening weekend, and
Really?
I saw it
Great.
twice in theaters. I saw it once with my best friend, and it was the first movie that her daughter technically went into theaters to see because her daughter was a newborn at the time. And so I saw it with my best friend, and then I saw it again with my now ex-husband. But the funny thing is that when I first saw the movie, first of all, when I first saw the trailers for the movie, I thought it looked stupid. I was like, I thought it was trying to like compete with Shrek. It was trying to be too hip and too popular. I mean, I remember the tagline, "She's been grounded for like ever." And I'm like, oh my God, what the hell is this? Disney, what are you doing? And so I don't remember what it is exactly that got me into the theater other than, well, I trust Disney, so I'll go ahead and see the movie. And when I walked out of the theater, I was basically like, no, that was fine. I enjoyed it. It was good, but I didn't adore it. And it wasn't until about a month later, I actually, on Facebook, I get, my memory every year is about January 23rd. So I guess a couple months later, 3 months later or so, I don't know what it was that made me say, okay, this is the thing that I want. This is my thing now. Because I have a Facebook memory of like, I think I can officially say that I'm obsessed with Tangled now. And I'm like, what changed? I mean, I do wonder in myself what changed. And I think a lot of it was just, it had to have filled some void in my life that I absolutely needed when it came along. Like, for one thing, it is aesthetically, like, beautifully. It's like, aesthetically, that is like, I love the color palette. I love the shapes they used. I love the writing dynamic, but I wasn't really, really into it. And I think that what caused me to be obsessed is that I even remember the screen cap I was looking for that brought me to Tumblr, is that I wanted a screen cap of Rapunzel lifting the lantern over her head from the boat, her parents' lantern. And so I think that what caused me to become obsessed with it was actually finding out that it was a lot deeper than I was giving it credit for. And so
Hmm.
when I
Mm-hmm.
started seeing the theories on Tumblr, not just the theories, but the actual observations on Tumblr about, well, when you look at this scene, Rapunzel and her freedom birds and all that kind of stuff, the freedom birds, which I was very happy to see they continued
Yeah.
to use in the series.
Yes.
Um, and so they, I just kept saying, I saw the freedom birds. I saw the thing about how the mobile was actually like foreshadowing to various things that were going to happen in Rapunzel's life during the course of the
Oh,
movie. And
yeah.
I was just seeing more and more things that were just like stuff you don't notice if you're just a casual viewer. And I was like,
Right.
this is so much deeper than I thought. And so I started like going down the rabbit hole. And from there, I think it was mostly more than the movie itself. It was probably the fandom that made me be like, this is where I'm staying. This is a fantastic group of
Mm-hmm.
people. I want to be
Yes.
here. This is a fun place to be. And it was not the first fandom that I was a part of, but it was the first fandom I think it was the first fandom that I deliberately went online to obsess
Mm-hmm.
over. Because it's like,
Yes.
I've been part of the Harry Potter fandom, and I was part of the Avatar The
Mm-hmm.
Last Airbender fandom and all that kind of stuff. But this was the
Yes.
first time I think it was the first time I was like actively just in a place where this is what I needed was this movie, this story, these friends that it got me. And so
Mm-hmm.
I just, I found the fandom and I hung out with the fandom and I really enjoyed that. I made a lot of like close personal friends who are still friends of mine through it. And then, you know, stuff happens, time goes on, the fandom starts to die out because fandoms die out. Frozen shows up, Disney fans have a new thing to be crazy over, and it was Forever Tangled Up on Tumblr. Her name is Ellie, and she's one of my podcast people.
Yes.
Um,
Absolutely.
she launched the Tangled fandom resurrection, and I was like one step behind her. I was like, this is a fantastic idea. I want to help you with this. So she and I
Yes.
worked together. While she is technically the founder of it, we've been working together basically the whole time. And so we
Right.
launched the Tangled fandom resurrection in 2015. I think it was 2015 we launched the fandom resurrection, and
Mm-hmm.
then a couple months later we got news that there was going to be a series. And then about a
Yeah.
week after that, we got the news that there was going to be the musical on the cruise ship. And so
Mm-hmm.
we just had this sensation of it's working. Like, we don't know what we're doing, but it's working. Like,
Right.
everything is being rewoken because we decided to do the revolution. So,
Yes.
so from there, I just, I was following all of the news that I could on the series, and it's like, they announce it and then they're quiet about it for like a year before they start talking about
Yeah.
it again. And so when they mentioned that it was going to be, Tangled Before Ever After, I'm like, okay, I'm going to make a blog. And that's just what I'm doing. I'm making a blog. I'm naming it Tangled BEA. It's funny the number of people who think that my name is B because BEA is,
Oh.
the name B. And I'm like, no,
Right.
no. Before Ever After. I
Yes.
just, it's name brand now. I can't exactly change my blog name without people going, where'd you go? So,
Right. Oh no.
so yeah, so I'm keeping the blog name, even though it's a little passe at this point. But,
Good.
but yeah, so, I mean, all of I have to say it was the fandom the entire time, which is interesting
Yeah.
because I'm now on a podcast about being an animation fandom, so it really
Right.
works out that way.
Man, I love that. And I love that having the ability to connect with so many people, like on Tumblr, on other social media sites, like for me too, is just like changes the entire experience of being in a fandom.
It really does.
Yeah,
It
because
really
you
does.
can connect. It's like the hive mind of like, there's so many people who can build on theories or give affirmation for like a headcanon or something, and just like with everyone working together, even in Tangled the series, like there were lots of theories that didn't turn out to be true, but there were lots that were that people would discuss over, and having the ability on Tumblr especially to like just see what other people are thinking about, and to just to know that other people are out there thinking about these shows in a deep way is huge.
Yeah, that's like, yeah, that is exactly what it is that knowing that there were other people who would think about something in a deep way, wanting to be one of those people who thinks about it in
Mm-hmm.
a deep way. That's what really drug me into Tangled and into the fandom in the first place. And
Yeah.
it's it's fascinating, honestly, as like a sociological standpoint, watching how things change with the advent of social media and it taking on
Mm-hmm.
and catching hold. Because I think that the biggest thing I was missing in my previous fandoms is that the internet wasn't as big yet. Is that
Mm.
you could find chat rooms or you could find message boards or whatever, but social media wasn't quite a thing yet. And so Tangled, I
Right.
think, was the first thing I was a fan of after social media became a thing, and that's
Mm-hmm.
why it got its meat hooks in me. And one of the things with our own podcast that we have noticed is our last podcast that we did so far, and we don't plan to do another one until the 10th anniversary because it was about the
Mm-hmm.
series, you know.
Yes.
But on the last one, we did a lot of we had a focal point talking about just the fans of our own podcast, and
Mm-hmm.
Ellie was saying that when the movie was new, she didn't have anybody to talk to about it. And so she was kind of
Mm-hmm.
isolated. And one of the things that our podcast has done is we have had so many people tell us that they love listening to the podcast because they don't have anybody to talk to about the series. And so they feel like they're a part of the conversation. And
Yes.
knowing that we facilitated that is like amazing. It's really it's so humbling because just like I keep saying how the crew are just people, I am also just a person. And so finding out that I've got specific fans who like not only my
Mm-hmm.
blog, but like listening to my podcast, I'm like, wow, I mean, I'm just a person and you want to listen to me, you know? So it's absolutely humbling, and just as humbling that, other podcast people are asking me to come onto their podcasts, that it's just I love it. It's great. And it's, more than I ever expected when I made a blog whose purpose was to archive the series.
Right. And I echo those sentiments as well. As just like your podcast is so fun, and all of you guys talking about everything. It truly is like, it's so nice to have that place you can go and hear discussion on a topic that you're also passionate about. And it even though it might seem like a small thing, like running a blog or making a podcast, like I know I personally have really, really enjoyed it, and really got a lot out of that work you do. So thank you from me personally too.
Oh yes, absolutely. I'm glad that you've enjoyed it. I'm glad that you've had the opportunity to listen and that it has brought something to you as well. And it's just, I mean, at this point, I feel like I'm doing a service to the fandom, and it's like a service that I'm choosing to do, but it's also kind of going into like my second full-time job that's entirely volunteer work.
Oh no.
It's crazy.
Right.
I do spend a lot of time maintaining my blog. But yeah,
Right.
I mean, I'm very glad to be there for the fandom and to
Mm-hmm.
have this encyclopedic knowledge of Tangled, and the stuff that I can't remember, I've tagged my blog so well that I can usually look things up. I'm like, oh no, I remember
Yeah.
what tag that was under. Let me just go find it. Might take me a couple hours, but I'll find it. But I mean, and so that is why I have such a comprehensive tagging system on my blog, is because I want to be
Yes.
able to find things later. I wanted it to be an archive. And
Exactly.
honestly, I haven't done much with the idea yet, but I've got a project in my head that I want to work on where I want to make a website that's basically a Tangled Wikipedia that is
Yeah.
all fact, 100% fact, that has nothing to do with fan theory. It's got nothing to do with,
Mm-hmm.
you know, editorializing it. It's just, here is the
Mm-hmm.
facts as they are presented. And I want to put this thing together because it's
Yeah.
it's inclusive of the movie, inclusive of the series. I'll even mention the comics and the books and all the things that are not technically canon but still do exist and can add something to the story. um I feel like it is something that is needed because so many
Absolutely.
people you know so many people will quote websites that I know for a fact have no problem throwing their fan theories out there and presenting them as fact. And I'm just like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not okay with that. And it's like, it's having a source blog is where you can look something up is easier than asking somebody and hoping that they A, see your ask, B, feel like answering it, that they D, just are interested in what you have to ask them. Because I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I get so many asks, honestly, I'm going to be honest that I don't answer every ask I get, and I'm sure there are some that I
Right.
don't see at all ever, like they never Tumblr ate it and it never got to me. But it's like, I'm a human being who lives my life. I don't get paid to do this. I don't answer every ask that I get.
Right. Yes.
um and so it's like, if you have a factual question that you want to answer to, I want to have this website that you can actually look up your answer. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, and the fact that it would be fan run and not for profit means that I wouldn't have to get permission to make this blog, because once
Right.
upon a time when the series first started, I wanted to make um, the unofficial fans guide to Tangled the series, but I wanted to make it
Mm-hmm.
as a book. But every time I tried to Google how you make an unofficial guide to things, I'd get results for the unofficial guide to how to do this other thing. And I'm like, no, that's not what I want. I want to know how to actually
Right.
publish my own book, what goes into publishing a book like that. And I could never
Yes.
find that. And then as the series was coming to a close, I'm like, you know what? I don't need to publish a book. I can just make a website. And, you
Absolutely.
know, and
Yeah.
so, yeah, that's a little project that I've got. I haven't done anything with it for a while, but I've wanted to have something like this since the series started, so I fully anticipate eventually having this website up. And it's not like canon is going to shift and change to the point where I can't, I'm going to have to try to
Mm-hmm.
keep up. No, it's over. And since it's
It's over.
over and I have
Right.
all the information, I can give you all the information that exists. So,
Yes. Oh man, I love that idea so much. And like what a great resource for, because clearly there's like a need for that, because so many people reach out to you specifically even for questions about things that are canon, or specific questions, and to have that resource would be really cool. So I think that's like a really great idea, and I hope that you obviously find the time. Don't it is all volunteer stuff, so don't go too crazy.
eventually, this isn't going to happen anytime soon, but it is something that I've got stewing in my brain. So,
Yes. And what I love too is like, you started your blog at a really great time too, like, just as the series was being announced, and you've really been through all of it. And
mm-hmm.
were there certain moments for you when you look back, like certain markers or places where you realized, oh, was it when you first contacted like someone on the crew, or was it when you had a certain number of followers? Like, what was it that where you were like, oh, I have like a say in this fandom, or you kind of are like an ambassador of the fandom to the crew? Like, when did that kind of become reality for you?
I honestly, I don't remember which crew member I was talking to, but it was either Chris Sonnenberg or Kate Ritter. But one of them, I think it was Kate, was telling me that the crew members referenced my webpage, like, while they were working on the show. Like, if they needed to like look something up real fast, they'd look it up on my page, and I'm like, excuse me, what? I am a source for the crew? What? So that is the moment at which I'm like, okay, this is like a legit thing that I've created, that
Yes.
that the crew is actually basically, it came down to, I was talking to 2 or 3 people in the crew, but then I found out that the crew actually knows who I am. And like, even if and I'm being told that, oh yeah, we go on your page all the time. And then I found out, farther down the line, because it took a while to actually start talking to the animators, and finding out that the
Mhm.
animators listen to the podcast and like look at my page also. And I'm like, the people who work on this show know who I am. What the heck is this? So
Yes.
yeah, that was the moment, I think, is that when I found out that the crew
Mhm.
actually knew who I was. One of the things that I have also gained from being friends with the crew is that the crew get to watch the fandom react to things that they personally stopped touching years ago. It's like they've been sitting on this particular episode for a year and a
Mhm.
half while it was being animated, and now they finally get to see how the fans are reacting to it. And so it's so interesting there. And I know that the crew, really, a lot of them, they do it for the fans. Like, the only thing keeping
Mhm.
them going is, how are the fans going to react to this when they finally get to see this episode. And
Right.
so, I mean, it's been a wild ride being able to be, friends with people who knew what was going to happen. And, I would have conversations with them and I would throw my ideas at them. And it's not like they could confirm or deny my ideas. They're just like, well, that's an idea that you have. I'm just like, okay, thanks. That helps nothing.
Not giving me anything, just can't quite deny or confirm any of it.
Well, I 100% respect the non-disclosure agreement. It's like, no, I get that you can't actually tell me what's going on. You can't give me spoilers in any way, shape, or form. They couldn't even give spoilers in the form of telling us that we would never find something out. Like, I believe that Kate Ritter was on an interview with the Tangled Discord at one point, and somebody had asked about Varian's mom, and what she said was, I can't talk about things that have or haven't happened on the series. And everybody took that to mean that Varian's mom was going to be important. And I'm like, no, that just means that she can't talk about it. And so that's what I mean about, being in the fandom, but also watching with an open mind and a critical eye, is that I in some ways I have to distance myself from the fandom so that I can keep my head together. Because if you dive fully into fandom, it's very, very easy to get carried away. And I know, because I get carried away with things. I'm not going to claim to be perfect and never, ever getting carried away. But one tends to interpret things with what they want to hear. And so if a creator says something and you want it to mean something specific, that's what you're going to believe it means. And so a lot of it, I'm like, I'm not saying that Varian's mom isn't going to be in the series, but I am saying that she said she couldn't talk about it, not that it's true or false,
Absolutely.
So, that's one of the big things that I've taken out of being part of the fandom and being where I am in the fandom is walking this interesting line as like almost the ambassador between the fandom and the crew. So I had to,
that is a good way to put it.
And so it's like I could absolutely enjoy the fandom and the fandom parts of the fandom, but I also had to, remind myself to not allow myself to get too carried away with theory and whatnot, because I learned the hard way, insisting that you're right, it doesn't make you right. Because the whole Cassandra Gothel thing, I'm just like, no, I was wrong, and I admit I'm wrong, and I'm mad I'm wrong, but I'm still wrong, and I was as insistent as I was, and as much evidence as I had about, my way of thinking, that didn't make me right. The story is not made for any individual person. It's made to serve the story that it wants to tell. And so as a fan, as fans, we need to remember that things are never going to, or let's see, what's a better way to phrase that? We cannot guarantee that things are going to go our way, and we have to be okay with that. It's like, if you want to continue enjoying a story, then you have to be able to say, well, I was wrong. That's not how I wanted it to happen, but that's the way the story needed to go. And so, it happens. And it happens to absolutely everybody, because there's not the only way you can make a story go the way you want to go is if you're the writer of the story, and as someone who writes stories, even then, it doesn't always go the way you wanted it to go. Because sometimes something pops into your head that changes it, and you're just like, oh, well, this is a better direction. This isn't what I intended. So,
it's a process, definitely.
It is.
Yeah, I just think of especially with animation, how many people and how many different people are putting their creative talents to use in this story, and with so many hands, it is being changed little by little by every single person who interacts with it. And so even like, a writer and director can have an overview, but also things are still going to change even if you have a specific idea of where it's going. Yeah.
Talking to Ricky Roxburgh, I had multiple stories about things that here was how he wanted it to go, and here's how it ended up being. And so it's just, things, no one has complete control over any episode, not a single person. And if an animation team is operated correctly, then everybody who works on the show, not like all the way down to the minute, I'm not saying that animators are minute details, but whatnot. But by the time the animators get it, the story is set, is what I mean. But everybody who has a work in the development process, if an animation team is done right, then everybody's got a voice. And things will always be molded and changed by someone else's ideas, and not just, here was the initial idea and we're doing it exactly this way. No, a good team is going to have everybody's voice be heard, and people will come to a consensus about what is actually the best way to tell this story. So, yeah, I mean, there's like, I think there was something like 150 people in Burbank, California, who worked on the front end of the development, and then there was like another 100 or something in Canada who did the actual animation. So this was this team of people who worked on the show was hundreds of people strong. And I really wish that like literally everybody got all of the credit they deserved, because I only know the names of a couple of the animators, and that's because I talked to them specifically. So so I really wish that there were more people who got the credit that they deserved for all of the work that went on the show, because it was like astoundingly intricate. And things that I learned about this show in particular, that the way that they worked the individual characters, is that they had, you know, their little mannequin doll thing on the computer, and then like all the little details are a layer, and the layers all have to operate together to make the character move correctly. So so the fact that they pulled off some of that really incredible animation was like mind-blowing. It's it's so much more complex than people think it is. It's just wow. I remember I had this one great moment where we were talking about the fans being able to predict things. Kate was telling me that before the series ever started, and all we had was a name and a description for Lance, that his name was Lance Strongbow, and he was Eugene's best friend, and that was all. And he was played by James Monroe Iglehart, and that was all we had. And somebody asked me, what do you think Lance is going to be like? And I said something like, I couldn't possibly know that, but like extrapolating what I know from Eugene with what I know from James Monroe Iglehart, I'm going to say that he is going to be a great, big, loud, fun guy who is Eugene's best friend, probably from his thieving days. And, you know, he's going to do his best to like get Eugene back into trouble, but it's not really going to work out. I threw out this description, and Kate said, and we all work with the next day. It's like, how did she do that? Just like, so I mean, and I'm not the only one who's done that. No, there have been other people in the fandom who have predicted things so precisely that they're just like, how did they do that? I remember when we got the trailer, you know, back when they were still giving us trailers. We got the trailer for Destiny's Collide, and there was a brief clip in the trailer of Eugene laying on the floor of what we now know was the gondola, and there was this shadow looming over him, and Ellie said something along the lines of, "That's that guy in the bear hood, and I think that's his father." And Amber Vunis was like, "What?" I mean, this was long after, you know, the Dark Prince Eugene theory had already been out, because that had been for the entirety of season 2. But knowing that this shadow looming over Eugene was the king in the bear hood was like, how did she do that? What? So I mean, and the fandom is so crazy that like we pick up on these nuances. But honestly, I think that is a marker of good storytelling, that you can put in nuances that keep people interested and so focused on it that they pick up the nuances and they can figure out what's going on without the broad strokes being shown to them. I mean, a lot of people are really into the surprise twist stuff. And by people, I mean the people making the shows. And I'm not just talking about animation. I'm talking about all media right now. They love surprise twists. But I feel that a marker of a good quote unquote surprise twist is that you can see it coming because it makes sense, you know?
Yes, absolutely.
And then you get that satisfactory moment of, haha, I was right, you know? So
right. Yes. And then it kind of gives you that tension too of like, as an audience member, for me at least, like that tension of, oh, I don't want it to happen, even though I could see it happening. You know, before it does. And it really does make for more of an engaging story. I agree.
I agree, yeah. And sometimes it's fun to not want something to happen, even though you can see it going that way. I mean, there is a sense of, well, all stories can't be told the way I want them to be told, and at least this makes sense for what's going on, you know?
Right,
Because it's
right.
like, you know, I will maintain until my dying day that Gothel being Castle's mom does not make sense. But I mean, that's gonna be like the hill I die on, man. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It's stupid.
We all have those for sure. Certain aspects
Yes,
were
yes,
like,
yes.
no, this. Oh man. So way back when, we just knew that Tangled the series was going to be a thing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what were your greatest hopes for the series, and did any of them, or what pieces of that actually happened for you?
Okay. When it was first announced, very, very first announcement in 2015, and all they gave us was like the promo picture where it's like half Eugene, half Rapunzel, and then just, you know, Tangled the series or whatever. Or if it said
Mm-hmm.
words on it at all, I don't think it even said words on it. They're just like, they're making an animated series based off Tangled. So, first of all, in that picture, Rapunzel was blonde, and I was like, please let her hair being there make sense. Please let that
Yes.
make sense, because if they just made her blonde for no reason, I'm gonna be livid. And, you know,
Right.
that got settled immediately, so I was fine with that. But then, honestly, one of the biggest things that I was carrying with me through the entire series was, okay, so we know her hair is going to get cut at the end, but please let that haircut be her choice. Like, the only thing I wanted, it didn't matter to me who actually did the cutting, but it had to be Rapunzel's choice, because every
Mm.
single hair thing that has happened to her in her entire life has not been her choice. It was not her choice to keep
Yeah.
it long. It was not her choice for Eugene to cut it. It was not her choice for it to grow back. And so I'm like, that haircut needs to be her choice. And it happened so perfectly that,
Mm-hmm.
like, I cried watching the episode for the first several times I watched the episode. When I talked about it on the
Mm-hmm.
podcast, I choked up and teared up, because
Mm-hmm.
it's just it meant so much to me that it happened exactly the way I needed it to happen. Like,
Yeah.
Rapunzel's agency has always been the biggest thing in her story, you know, because in the movie, it's all about her finding her agency. And then in the series, season one is about her doing it again. And so I
Yes.
needed her. I absolutely needed her to be able to have the agency to decide for that to be the thing that happens. And so, like,
Mm-hmm.
it was just this huge emotional impact thing that it was perfect, and it happened exactly perfectly, just what I
Yeah.
wanted. So if nothing else, that's going to be the thing I carried with me, is that, like, oh yeah, her return to short hair was perfect. Like,
I would
anything else I
agree.
didn't like about the episode, I loved that, and I love the proposal, I'm not going to lie. But
Yes, yes, definitely.
But
Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, so that was the absolute biggest thing. But when the series was first announced, I thought it was going to be some kind of a day in the life, learning how to be a princess and learning how to exist in society kind of story. I had no idea it was going to be this epic fantasy, and so because of that, I literally had no thought of what to expect out of this story. I'm just like, okay. Yeah, I trust you guys. I mean, I'm talking to crew, and the crew seems to like believe in this story. So I'm gonna back you guys up, and I'm just gonna like blindly back you guys up. So I did,
Yes.
and yeah. So like at the very beginning, all I wanted at the very beginning was a good reason for her to have long hair again. So I got it, and that was nice.
Yes, and they clearly they had a plan for an overarching story, and that in and of itself, I was glad that there was some continuity through the whole thing.
Yeah, I did too, because I mean, I think that one of the blockades that they had to fight with is something that I've talked to various crew about, is that the network wanted this series to be episodic enough that they could just air reruns in whatever order they felt like and have it not feel like
Mm.
you were missing something, which, go figure, then they never aired reruns. Um,
Right.
but I mean, they did like once, I think they rerun all of season one once, and that was it. And I was like,
Yeah.
what? But yeah, so so unfortunately, because of that, a lot of I won't say it feels disjointed, because it doesn't, but that's where you get the quote unquote filler episodes. But
Mm-hmm.
the interesting thing with the quote unquote filler episodes is that almost all of them have something to do with some other episode. Like they're all linked in some small way. It's not like you won't know what's going on if you miss this episode, but it does
Mm-hmm.
hint to something that's going to happen later or something that has happened before. And I do appreciate
Right.
that they did try to establish some sort of continuity even in the smaller things. Um, because I just, I wasn't expecting an overarching story. I didn't know what to expect out of it, but what we got was not it. That's for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Here's just like a fun extra question of if you were going to write another episode for the series, and you can put it wherever you want in any of the seasons, what would you want the episode to be about?
I have always wanted a Eugene and Lance in the orphanage episode. It's like the whole thing doesn't have to
Oh.
take place in the past, but I wanted to see them as children and
Mm-hmm.
as who they were before they decided to be thieves. And I
Yes.
actually just published this on Tumblr last night because somebody had made this random mention in something, and I'm like, oh, they had randomly mentioned that they figured that the orphanage was north of Varderos because Quaid did their first arrest, and the Baron is based in Varderos, and Eugene hates the cold, so it makes sense to have it be north of that. Yada yada
Mm-hmm.
yada. And I was like, okay, I actually know about an episode that got shelved. And so I posted about this episode that got shelved. It was called "The Trial of Fitzherbert and Schnitz." When I
Mm-hmm.
toured Disney TV studios, I saw the binder on a bookshelf behind Chris's desk, and it was far separated from all the other episode binders because all the other episode binders were on a bookshelf on the other side of the room in order.
Hmm.
So that was clearly a shelved episode that wasn't going to be made. And then later on, I was
Yeah.
talking to Ricky Roxburgh, and he told me what that episode was about. And it was actually basically the episode that we all wanted and never got. It was the story about Lance and Eugene in the orphanage, and Eugene was going to be adopted. And um,
Mm.
but Lance didn't want his best friend to go, and so he broke
Aw.
this window and blamed Eugene. And so then the potential parents were like, "Well, we don't want to adopt a hooligan," so the adoption fell through.
Oh
And
no.
Eugene never knew why they decided not to adopt him, or if he was aware that he was being blamed for the window. He was always upset that nobody believed him that he didn't do it. And
Oh
so it was
no.
this missed opportunity thing. And so while
Mm-hmm.
they're in Varderos, they come across the orphanage and the window is still broken. And Eugene's all upset, and Lance starts to feel guilty. So Lance confides in Rapunzel what happened. Therefore, we're actually getting
Ooh.
Lance and Rapunzel bonding, which we never got in the series. You know,
Yeah.
it was odd. We had a couple moments here and there where Rapunzel and Lance interact, but really
Uh
Rapunzel and
huh.
Lance don't interact that much. And it's just like,
They
that's so
don't.
bizarre, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they spend so much time together, so they should.
Right. I mean, it's like I think that in season 2 they like don't even have a conversation. It's like, what the heck, you know? They spend the entire time on the road together, and the two of them don't have a conversation except when Rapunzel is like yelling at Lance to stop whistling, you know?
Whoa.
But
I've never thought about that. That's so crazy.
yeah, it's crazy. They don't actually have a conversation. I mean, you got a couple small interactions, but the two of them never have an actual conversation. It's so weird.
Right.
But anyway, so going on with this episode, so Lance confides in Rapunzel what happened, and he's like, okay, it's been years and it's still clearly bothering Eugene, and I want to make it right. So, how do you go about breaking news to Eugene that you know he's going to hate? What do you do to soften the blow? So, Rapunzel suggests, to like do something fun with him, give him good food, do an activity he likes. And there was going to be this whole scene where like Lance packs a picnic boat and takes him out on a rowboat, and kind of this adorable like bro date thing where and
Yeah.
he explained to him what happened. And Eugene is obviously furious. He's like, it's
Mm-hmm.
not okay that this happened. And so he gets furious with Lance. And the part of the reason why it got shelved, actually the biggest reason why it got shelved, is because they couldn't really, there was like this factor that they couldn't decide on how it should go. And because they couldn't decide, they're like, look, we just got to like set this aside and keep going with our lives. We can't do this episode.
Hmm.
But the factor was that in the past, when they were kids, there were going to be these two bullies who were particularly mean to both Eugene and Lance, especially Eugene, possibly also Lance. I don't remember all the details. I've just told it, so I don't have the whole thing memorized. But
Right.
then, like, there's going to be this factor about the two men still live in Varderos and are still just as brutish and burly and bullying. And there's going to be some X factor with these guys that they could not work out about what these guys had to do with the story. But then in the end of the episode, Lance is going to fix the window, and he and Eugene would make amends, and that would be the end of it. And so basically, this was the story that we all wanted and didn't get, and it was just like, because it confirmed definitively that they grew up in Varderos. That the orphanage was in Varderos, which they hinted at that as many ways as they could. They're talking about in Next Up Anywhere, they talk about how it was their old stomping grounds, and then the whole thing with the Baron, and that's where the Baron is centralized, and then Quaid arrested them there. That was their first arrest, was in Varderos. And so just they said they did everything that they could to say they grew up in Varderos without actively saying that they grew up in Varderos, because they didn't have that episode. But Ricky did tell me that they did write other episodes keeping in mind that the orphanage is in Varderos. So even though it didn't make it into the series, it is their intended backstory is that they're in Varderos. So, but all things considered, having just told you that, I wish that episode had been made, and that would be the episode that I would have had made. So.
Yes, absolutely. That is phenomenal. And oh man, I feel like we've been gypped as a fandom. That would have been so great.
Oh my gosh, I remember screaming at Ricky after he told me that. I'm like, no, I want that episode. Give it to me now. I want it. Like, oh yeah, no, yeah. So I know that on the Discord server there's this FitzFam server, and their whole focus is Eugene. And apparently they were rioting last night after I posted that, because they're just like, we were gypped. How dare they cheat us out of that? Just like, yeah. I'm like, now you guys know how I've been feeling for years sitting on that episode. So,
oh no, yes, oh man, I just think of all the ideas that might not have been able to go through, and it's like I always say, we have 3 whole seasons, which is super great, but then I'm always like, but we could have even more. It feels like fandoms can never be satisfied, and I'm definitely part of the problem.
I have always been of the mindset, because I remember before the series came out, Zachary Levi did an interview with GQ magazine, and in that interview, he stated that it was going to be 3 seasons long. So I knew from the beginning that it was going to be 3 seasons long. I'm like, look, we're getting 3 seasons. I'm satisfied with that. It's a finite story. They're not going to jump the shark. It's, and I'm very, very happy that they got the time they wanted to tell the story that they wanted.
Yes,
even if I wasn't wholly satisfied with the 3rd season, at least they told the story that they wanted to tell,
Yes.
And so I would not want it to go on indefinitely, because look what happens to shows that go on indefinitely. Like,
true.
Honestly, I haven't watched it in years and years and years, but like, Supernatural is finally ending. Finally, how many seasons has it been? 15 or something like that. And I'm like,
ridiculous.
What?
Definitely. At least I prefer things to end when the creators have planned something out, they've got it, and they know what the end will be, instead of just trying to drag it on without any forward momentum.
I will say that was one of the specifically fun things about Tangled, is that we all knew that Rapunzel and Eugene got married at the end, but now we get to see this adventure that gets them there. And it was, so it's like, I remember a lot of the stuff with the fandom is that, we'd scream for Eugene to be almost killed, or to be killed to get him brought back, or to like be blinded, like in the original fairy tale. We were screaming for all this Eugene angst, and people would be like, why do you want this angst? And we're like, because we know it will be okay in the end. And since we already know that, we can ask for the pain knowing it'll be okay. So
right. There won't be any lasting consequences.
That is honestly my biggest thing when it comes to fiction, is it's like, oh yeah, I enjoy the angst, provided it has a happy ending. I need my happy ending, otherwise what is even the point?
Absolutely. And it's true. It's like, we knew that at least Eugene and Rapunzel would be okay.
Yep.
and truly, the whole series, I think they did an absolutely phenomenal job with Rapunzel and Eugene and their relationship together. Like, it was brilliant being able to see so much of them as a couple. And I know you're such, a new Dream fan, and they're thinking of you when they're, putting this stuff together. So what was like your favorite new Dream moment?
Well, the actual proposal might be it, because like, oh god, I still cry when I watch it. Not necessarily with the horrible sobs that I cried the first time I watched it, but I mean that was done so perfectly. Because I remember when Tangled Before Ever After came out, and the first time Eugene proposed, I'm like, oh my god, he's doing it in front of a crowd of strangers. She doesn't know what's going on. She hasn't specified that she wants this yet. This is like the worst proposal ever. When the proposal takes, it needs to be like soft and intimate and just the two of them, and that's what I want from the proposal that works. And then that's what happened. So I got what I wanted out of the proposal, so that was amazing. It's really hard to pick, other than that, a specific moment that I liked a lot. I mean, I should say liked the most, because there's so many that I like a lot. Like, I mean, Eugene finding out that Rapunzel was planning to propose to him was like, oh, heart-clutchingly adorable. Like,
yes,
he's just so happy. Like, oh my god, that was so great. And then like every time she plays with his face, it's just adorable. And he always like lights up like the sun when she's like grabbing his nose or pinching his cheek. He thinks it's the cutest freaking thing. That's so great. Just like I mean, I can't pick. I love, obviously, yes. I love the new Dream moments, but one of the things I love about the way that they're presented in this series is that it's not like they're just a couple, and when they're not being lovey-dovey, they don't really interact. These two are obviously friends, and they made a point of having them like tease each other or be exasperated with each other, and not necessarily in like having a fight way, just in a like, for example, Rapunzel tells a bad joke and she's like, yeah, that's not funny, just like so I mean, so it's like they're not afraid to exist around each other the way that they actually are. They don't feel like they have to impress each other anymore. They're just like, no, we are so comfortable with each other that we're just ourselves around each other. And it's amazing. And I love that. And it's just like, it's such quality relationship building in a story, especially when you look at a Disney fairy tale where most other relationships, all you get is the movie. And so you get, and they lived happily ever after, but you don't really see how this relationship functions outside of their adventure,
Right.
And so yes. I love that with Rapunzel and Eugene, you get so much of their day-to-day, so much of their, domesticity. I mean, in Pascal's story, how he like comes to her cooking in the kitchen, and so he like helps her cooking, or in Goodbye and Goodwill, when like he's just doing the dishes, man. Like, dude, that's great. Yes. I mean, I will never forgive him for not taking off his leather gloves to do the dishes, but he's doing the dishes. At least that's that. But yeah, so you have, I mean, like little things like she'll be in her room doing her own hobbies. I love that they can exist outside of each other. Like they're not like attached at the hip. They each have friends outside of each other. They have hobbies outside of each other. They don't need to spend every waking moment together to be happy, but they also know that they can come to each other for anything. And it's so good. And I love it so much.
Absolutely. Yes, I echo all of those sentiments. It's every part of their journey is wonderful, and I'm glad that they had a chance to like delve deeper into it, for sure. Obviously I really love your blog, and I love that how open you are about like, animation can be for everybody, and your willingness to share your enthusiasm definitely inspired me to share my own enthusiasm, like regardless of what anyone says. Like, what advice would you give to people who might come in contact with like combativeness, or people who don't really understand that love for animation, regardless of who you are or what age you are?
The first thing that I would advise is literally the thing that I said before about just remind them that adults are the ones who make the animation, and the adults are the fans of their own work. So, you might think of it as for kids, but kids are obviously not making this. But also it can be hard to face things like that in, your personal life. And I don't know if this is actually advice, but I do know what I would tend to do in cases like that is I'm not a confrontational person. And so if somebody's going to like confront me about it, I tend to back off. Then I will go online and find like-minded people because nothing makes you feel more accepted than finding like-minded people.
Yes.
And so part of why I have been so open about my age when it comes to the fandom is because I can't tell you how many other adult fans see my blog and go, "Oh, thank God, somebody my own age." You know, like I
Right.
have a lot of friends in the fandom who are in their 30s, and I'm like, that's great. I'm glad that there are so many adults. I think there's one gentleman who I believe he lives in Australia, if I remember correctly, and he's older than me. Like I want to say he's a good 10 years older than me, and he watched the show with his daughter, but he wanted to be able to talk to other adults about it. You know,
Yes.
and
Oh, that's great.
I recently saw in the tags somebody on Tumblr and Anon was like, "Oh, I'm a Tangled fan of a certain age," and they're like, "Oh, it doesn't matter what age you are, you can enjoy it." And I'm like,
Yes.
"Yes, this absolutely," but at the same time, I feel bad that people still feel the need to hide their age because it's a cartoon. And I'm like, it's not fair to the adults who enjoy things like that people get stigmatized for it. It's stupid,
right.
you know? But I think also we're starting to come into a time societally as, you know, I like to call myself the oldest of the millennials because, you know, I think that my age is, I mean, the actual dividing line between Gen X and millennial is like with any other generation, there's a little bit of wiggle room on either direction, but it's about where I am. Maybe a year younger than me is considered the official beginning of millennials, but I think like a millennial, therefore I consider myself a millennial. But as millennials are all in their 30s and approaching 40s and are the adults now, and as Gen Z is coming out of high school and being in their 20s and in their 30s, I think we're seeing a societal shift of letting people like what they like so long as it doesn't harm anybody. You know?
Right.
It's like we're getting to a point where we're saying, look, you know, I think it helps that we can talk to crew members on social media now because we're able to speak to the adults who work on it in the first place.
Absolutely.
And so that's why I'm online has been a humongous advantage in that regard. That I mean, I wouldn't say I fully hid my love for animation because I've never been like ashamed to say that I love animation, but it wasn't until, you know, probably about halfway through the series that I started being more upfront with my family about how much I love Tangled. You know, I'm like, no, guys, you don't get it. This is my favorite movie ever, you know?
Yes.
And because I was, you know, still getting criticism from them for that. And so, you know, you do face it. Even doesn't matter how old you get, you're going to face the crap. But
yeah.
But yeah, so finding like-minded people online is going to be helpful because then you'll know you're not alone.
Yes. Yeah.
Like the person that I gave the advice to in the first place all those years ago, like she and I still chat, you know, because she learned she wasn't alone, and we usually don't even talk about Tangled. It's really funny. So it's just, but feeling accepted is, you know, it's a huge part of it. And so if you are facing non-acceptance in real life, try to be, I want to say try to be mature about it because it's stupid that we have to not be emotional in order to be taken seriously. And this goes for anybody, basically. You know, if you are considered the minority in any situation, you have to be considered level-headed to be taken seriously. So, you know, do what you can to be level-headed, to try to get your point across. Just kind of state, well, you know, everything's not for everybody. You're perfectly allowed to not like animation, but, you know, don't get on my case for it. And then find people who understand you.
Yes.
Like my dad, for example, he loves animation. He'll see animated movies, but he always feels weird when animated movies make him cry. And we're like, why? Why does that make you feel weird? Why is that any different from any other movie or book that you're reading? You know?
Yes.
It's just it's still a story, and that just means that the story touches you. So what if they're animated? You realize that those superheroes are mostly CGI at this point anyway, right? You know?
Right.
You're watching animation whether you think it or not. So
yes.
So yeah, it's just, I mean, my sister is also a big adult animation fan, and an animation fan who is an adult. There we go. And so she and I will tag team him and just be like, Dad, stop, you're being stupid, stop, you know.
Right.
So so yeah, so it's like you do face it, but at least, you know, we have the advantage of, at least in that situation, is that we're having a conversation and he's a reasonable guy. I understand that not everybody's going to be dealing with reasonable people when they have a conversation like this. So I mean, yeah, so it's the best thing to do is to know that you are, try to remember that you are not actually alone, even if you are being, you know, faced off in person. And then when you have the chance, find the like-minded people and talk it out with them, and even talk about not just, you know, whatever is it you're into, but even talk about the issues you've been having, you know, not being accepted, and therefore you can achieve that acceptance, you know, through these people who are these friends, these trusted people online who are like-minded people. So I mean, that's basically the best advice that I can give in that regard.
Absolutely. And I think that's brilliant. I think truly being able to find people and connect with people who do understand and, you know, are affirming. And if there are people in, you know, your real life too that are at least understanding of it. But again, yeah, just how phenomenal it is to be part of fandoms in an internet culture where you can very easily connect with other people who are just ecstatic about the same things is just truly fantastic.
And another fun thing about that is that finding out with through the fandom is, you know, there's going to be portions of the fandom that aren't going to be available everywhere. But as an adult, if you have more adult tastes, you are bound to find people who, you know, like those adult tastes also. And so you'll be able to find content that you can take in that, you know, doesn't make you feel like this is just for kids, you know, honestly.
Absolutely. They are out there, regardless of what you might think. You know, we're out there, the adults who love animation. Yeah. So I also wanted to ask you. So obviously you're a big member of the Tangled fandom specifically, but what other fandoms are you a part of, and or what other animated media like do you love, and or are you watching right now?
Okay, so Tangled is definitely my number one top huge fandom. I don't think I've ever been involved so thoroughly in a fandom as I am with Tangled. Like,
Yes.
there's nothing else that I'm like more than a casual fan of, really. Like, I don't delve into theories on most things, but I mean, I love Steven Universe. I really enjoyed all of the directions that took. I really appreciated how it did present adult themes in a way that a younger audience could understand, which honestly I think helped adults understand it better too. Because,
Absolutely.
I mean, sometimes your problem is that you don't know how to think about something, or you don't know how to express it. And if something is actually allowed to exist, quote unquote, for kids, they simplify the conversation and make it more palatable. So I think that Steven Universe did a fantastic job with that. I've probably seen Gravity Falls 10 times through, all the way through at this point, because like every time it's on, I just let it run. DuckTales, I am always excited for the new episodes of DuckTales.
They're so good.
They're so good. I mean, and the new season is going on right now, and so like I'm
Yes.
super hyped about that. So that's a lot of fun. Let's see what else is going on. It's not out yet, but interestingly, a lot of the Tangled crew is working at Monsters at Work, which is the Monsters Inc. series that's coming out. I'm not sure when it's going to start, but I know that they've been at work at it for a couple years now. So that might be, you know, next year or something. I don't know exactly when it's planning on coming out. But yeah, so Monsters at Work, and I understand that they actually, like, it's not like Mike and Sully aren't in it, but I think that the series is going to be focused on a new character who is going to be able to take the reins and be the audience participation character for all intents and purposes. And so I understand that everybody who works on this show loves this show. And so I'm not like hyper duper into Monsters Inc., but like knowing that people whose opinions matter to me who work on it love it makes me want to see it. So I'm kind of hyped for that.
So exciting.
And yeah, that's so exciting. I'm super stoked about that one. anything else. I was into Star and the Forces versus the Forces of Evil while that was
Mm-hmm.
on. It did have its kind of semi-floppish ending, you know, like they got cut
Yeah.
short so they couldn't tell their whole story,
Yeah.
which was
That was a
unfortunate.
bummer.
But honestly, my favorite character in that series got the development he deserved, so I was happy with that.
And who was your favorite in that series?
Tom. It was
Tom. I
Tom.
was gonna say, I agree wholeheartedly. Tom is great.
I mean, because it's like he starts out with his whole, you know, rebellious evil teen demon thing going on, and then
Uh-huh.
by the end, he had so much self-respect that I was like, "That is what you deserve, boy. That self-respect. Oh yeah." So I was
Yes.
like all into that. Yeah, honestly, I didn't start really getting into that show until he became a more regular player, just because,
Mm-hmm.
like, he was the most interesting character to me, and in every other way, it was sort of episodic. But then
Mm-hmm.
when he started being a more regular character was also when the show started getting more political, and I'm like, no, this is
Yeah.
actually really interesting. So I mean, I really got
Absolutely.
into that. I was honestly, when Tangled had the whole stuff with Seporia, I was like,
Yeah.
is this show going to get political? Oh my gosh. So I was like,
Right.
I was not
Right.
expecting Zontiri though. So
Yes.
but yeah, so I mean, yeah, so I the thing I loved about Star the most, I think, was actually that they unflinchingly talked politics in it, and I
Oh
thought that
yes.
was a really interesting direction to take. But yeah, so oh no, I've been watching Owl House, and I like Owl House. That's a good one. It's got it's got the magic thing, but also being kind of quirky, like
Yes.
quirky in a way that a lot of things are afraid to be quirky. It's got a lot more Gravity Falls feel, but part of that is honestly because Dana Terrace is Alex Hirsch's girlfriend, so they have similar
Yes.
taste. So
Exactly. Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah.
so I mean, I like the direction that a lot of Disney stuff is taking. Is that they're starting to go for a lot of the more quirky magical stuff with maybe a dash of horror thrown in, and I'm
Yeah.
enjoying that. It's refreshing, you know.
Very. I would agree. And there's so much good stuff coming out right now that and you know, as time passes and more people come into the animation industry, having, you know, grown up watching, you know, Avatar: The Last Airbender and other, you know,
God,
shows
yes.
that
Avatar.
yeah, yes, Avatar is so good. And you know, I feel like it is a cycle of just like more animators who grew up on good animation making even better animation, and so we just get more and more really great stuff, and I love it.
Yeah, I know that Rebecca Sugar was saying that the reason why she made Steven Universe is that she wanted to make the TV show that she wished existed when she was a kid. So as we're getting more of that, we're getting more people
Yeah.
who are just growing up with, you know, better quality stories. And so they're like, oh, the animation doesn't have to be just, you know, a dum dum box medium. It can actually be a really in-depth good story.
Right.
And my hope for the future of animation is that studios start to understand and accept that they don't have to aim it at children in order for it to be enjoyable. You know,
Yes.
sure, make it available to children and acceptable to children, but that doesn't have to be the focus. Because if Tangled had a
Absolutely.
single downfall, I think, well, not a single downfall, I had a couple things that bothered me. But if Tangled had, like, its biggest problem, I think, was that Disney wanted it to be aimed at like the 6 to 12 age range, but the people who were making the show wanted it to be aimed at an older audience, but they had to keep it tame for the younger audience. And
Yeah.
so, and I'm not saying that it, you know, should have been allowed to be darker, because they got to do several things that I'm like, whoa, I can't believe they got away with that, you know?
Right.
But the fact that we have to say things like, I can't believe they got away with that, I hope that sentiment vanishes. I hope that over time they just start to allow animation to be a different storytelling medium, you know?
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. And I do think that we are slowly getting there. I hope. I feel like at least that the horizons have been broadened and continue to. But because even now we're getting these great stories that aren't just, you know, a 20-minute commercial. It's more than that. It's delving into characters and, you know, actually producing content, producing stories that people connect with.
Yes.
I agree, definitely.
Not to say that we don't want merchandise of our shows, Disney.
Right, exactly. To be clear, yes.
I mean, it's not a 22-minute commercial, but give us the merch. Come on.
Right, yes, please. Can I just have a Rudiger, like, plushie? That's what I want.
Oh my gosh, right?
Yes.
Missed opportunity.
Completely missed it. Don't know. Oh, that's great. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kelly. I really appreciate that you wanted me here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining Bex and I for this special episode. You can find Bex on Tumblr at Tangled BEA and on her podcast, Tangled Talk with Team Awesome. I had an absolute blast discussing Tangled the series, and I want to hear your thoughts on the show on Facebook, Tumblr, or Instagram at Fanimated Podcast. You can also email us at fanimatedpodcast@gmail.com. Our YouTube channel, Fanimated Media, has even more content where I geek out about animation. The art for this podcast is done by myself. You can find me on Instagram at CandorDraw. The music is provided by Purple Planet Music, and again, a huge thank you to Bex for joining me today. Emma will be back on the podcast soon to go even deeper into Tangled the series with me, so we will talk to you soon, and stay tuned and stay animated.
Oh, I understand. I 100% understand the foibles of editing a podcast.
Yes. Oh, yes. It's a wild ride.